partner in the firm Messrs. RRA Legal, Law, Tax and Economic Law Advisors and Advocates. He actively handles direct tax litigations and advisory. He is also an associate member of the ICI and an associate member of the ICMA of India. Apart from the above, he also holds Masters in Commercial Law from University of Birmingham, UK and Diploma in ICA by ICAI. He regularly appears before various benches of Honorable ITAT, High Courts and Supreme Court of India, and several cases argued by him have also been reported in leading tax journals. He is regularly invited by various chambers and study circles to give lecture on tax-related topics, and his articles on corporate tax have been published on itatonline.org and journals of various professional entities. Somil shall be deliberating on penalty provisions under the Income Tax Act, and now I hand over the charge to Somil.
Thank you, Nitika ji. Respected Khivani sir, Rajesh sir, Kanika ji, Ramanjit ji, and my very dear friend Nitika ji, and all my respected senior professional colleagues and friends. So as Nitika ji has already said, that the topic that we will be discussing today is regarding penalties under the Income Tax Act, and special emphasis, as we have already flashed in our flyer, would be on section 270 capital A and 271 double AD. So before I delve into the specific provisions, so penalty under the Income Tax Act. So penalty proceedings, number one, are independent of the assessment proceedings. Assessment proceedings are taxing proceedings. However, the conclusions of the assessment proceedings will not render penalty automatic. The assessment proceeding, the conclusion, the material brought on record by the assessing officer is a good evidence, but it is not conclusive to levy penalty. And penalty proceedings are independent. Independent show cause notice has to be given, independent order is passed, appeal mechanism is independent. So penalty and assessment proceedings are two independent and distinct proceedings under the Income Tax Act. We are all aware about the recent regime of the faceless assessment being introduced. And number of times a question is asked, what about the penalty proceedings? So first and foremost, under the faceless assessment regime that was introduced on 13th August 2020 by the notifications, the penalty, there is a provision under the scheme itself to levy penalty, but that is with respect to penalty for non-compliance only. If there is any non-compliance of any notice or direction of any of the assessment unit, technical unit, verification unit, then such unit can recommend to the NEAC for levy of penalty, and then a draft, obviously opportunity of hearing would be given to the assessee, reply is solicited, and then after receiving the reply, if the case is deemed fit, then the specific unit will then levy penalty, pass a draft order, which would be sent to the NEAC for sending it to the assessee. So under the faceless assessment scheme, only penalty for non-compliance has been included, whereas the other penalty provisions like 270 capital A, 271 double AD, all these are still with the jurisdictional assessing officer, who abbreviation or acronym we use is JAO, jurisdictional assessing officer. In fact, the scheme also provides that once the order is passed, everything will come back to the JAO, and he will then take care of the further proceedings as if like rectification, appeal effect, penalty, and all those things. Obviously, section 274, subsection 2A has been added by Finance Act 2020, wherein power has been taken to formulate a scheme for similar faceless penalty proceedings also. However, the scheme has still not been formulated, but the power has been taken, and in times to come, shortly, even these proceedings will go into the faceless regime as well on the same parameters of bringing more efficiency, transparency, accountability on lines of eliminating interface, team-based jurisdiction, and then functional specialization. So as of now, obviously, the penalty proceedings are would be carried out in the conventional method as was being done earlier. Even we all are aware of the recent introduction of the Taxation and Other Laws Relaxation and Amendment Bill 2020, which was introduced in the Parliament yesterday. So a complete paradigm shift is being brought into the system with faceless concept. In times to come, once this become act in subsequent from April 21 in some situations, the regime would be faceless assessment, faceless penalties, faceless reassessment, and all those things will come into play. So, be that as it may, today what we discuss is what are the provisions of 270 capital A and 271 double AT. Chapter 21 of the Income Tax Act is replete with penalty provisions, has a large family of penalty provisions. First and foremost, I'll take up section 270 capital A. Now, 270 capital A was introduced by Finance Act 16 into the Act to be applicable with effect from 1st April 2017. That is from assessment year 17-18 onwards. I'll just share my screen and bring the provision in front. Nitika ji, visible? Okay.
Yes, visible.
Thank you. So 270 capital A has substituted the erstwhile provision of 270(11)(c), the penalty provision, penalty for concealment of particulars of income and furnishing of particulars of income. The erstwhile provision has now been substituted by 270 capital A, penalty for underreporting and misreporting of income, with effect from assessment year 17-18. Now, going into the memorandum, the purpose for which this whole regime has been changed, apparently it appears is, they say, for rationalization, to bring more certainty, more clarity into the provisions of penalty. Now, to my mind, the erstwhile provision 270(11)(c), which had 8 live subsections and 7 explanation, has been now replaced by 12 subsections and 1 explanation. So in that respect and to that extent, it has been simplified. Subsection 1 of 270 capital A provides that the assessing officer or commissioner appeals or the principal commissioner or commissioner during the course of any proceeding under this act direct any person who has underreported his income shall be liable to pay a penalty in addition to tax, if any, on the underreported income. Now, the authorities who have been given jurisdiction to levy penalty under section 270 capital A are assessing officer, commissioner appeal and principal commissioner commissioner, which are same as was there in the erstwhile provision of 271. The concept which has now been introduced is with respect to the underreported income. You may kindly see in subsection 1, the only word which has been used is on which penalty would be levied is underreported income. So, as opposed to the erstwhile 2 charges, which has been a cause of lot of immense litigation, and therefore because of that probably and the legislature thought it fit to do away with those charges, but whether they have been able to do so and whether there is no requirement of initiation or satisfaction is something which we'll see a little later. But what I want to emphasize here is that the new word now coined over here is underreported income. This whole provision now revolves around the single term underreported income. Underreported income, if I say it simplicity, it is the difference between the assessed income and the processed income. Now, underreported income has been defined in this provision under subsection 3 with the help of various situations. Various situations such as processing of the return, return filed, return not filed, 143(1)(a), assessments or reassessments made, income shown in the return. In all these scenarios, it has been given how underreported income is to be computed under subsection 3. Subsection 2 provides a person who would be considered to be underreported, to have underreported his income on the similar concept. But instead of getting into this complex web of how to understand it, if I put it simply, underreported income is difference between assessed income and processed income where the return of income has been filed by the assessor. If the return of income has not been filed by the assessee or it is filed for the first time under section 148, then underreported income is the difference between assessed income and the basic exemption limit available. That would be your underreported income. In case of companies, firms where there is no basic exemption limit, in such cases, then the assessed income would be your underreported income where no return of income has been filed or return of income has been filed for the first time under 148. So this is an important change which has been brought under 270 regime. Similarly, in case of losses, difference between your assessed loss and your claimed loss, or if it has been converted into income, difference between the income and your claimed loss is the claimed and the processed loss is your underreported income. Similarly, pattern has been given for income in respect of the MAT provision, which is similar to the explanation 4 to 270.11c, which we had earlier, A minus B plus C minus D. The same concept is there in respect of MAT also. So, in these scenarios, underreported income has been explained. Now, to put it in single line, all the additions and disallowances made in the assessment order which result in a difference between the processed income and the assessed income, that in totality is your underreported income. This is the underlying principle, that this is your underreported income. Another concept of misreporting of income is there, which is given in subsection 8 and 9, wherein certain situations are there which we'll discuss, where the underreported income would be treated as underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, which would attract a higher percentage of levy of penalty. Now, as I was discussing the authorities that can levy penalty, so the assessing officer will have the jurisdiction to levy penalty on the underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, which are found during the course of assessment or reassessment. Who are that? The AO will have the jurisdiction to levy penalty under section 270 capital A. Coming to the commissioner appeals, learned CIT appeal, wherever he makes enhancement in the appeal against assessment order, that is appeal against in the quantum appeal, whatever enhancement he makes, who are that? He would have the jurisdiction to levy penalty under section 270 capital A. A question may arise, is that what about where he ceased with the penalty appeal and he makes enhancement in the penalty appeal? Then is it not under 270 capital A? Sir, in my humble submission, that is a power exercised under section 251 of enhancement when he's dealing with the penalty appeal. But this enhancement of quantum income, when made by the CIT appeal in the appeal against assessment in the quantum appeal, who are that enhancement? It is the CIT appeal who is required to levy penalty, and that jurisdiction he gets from 270 capital A. On the similar concept, the principal commissioner or commissioner, while exercising their revisional power under section 263, when they make enhancement, they make revision in the assessment order, who are that revised income that they make, penalty under section 270 capital A, the jurisdiction they get to levy penalty on such revised income. So in the latest introduced bill, which was yesterday, in 263, the power has been given to invoke 263 even to the chief commissioner and principal chief commissioner also. It has been proposed in the bill introduced yesterday. But the thing which I could figure out is that there is no change in the authorities in 270 capital A. So this issue may arise if subsequently principal chief commissioner or chief commissioner exercise their power of 263. Who are that revised income? Whether they will be able to levy penalty in 270 capital A, because penalty has to be strictly, the provision has to be strictly construed. And as per 270 capital A, the authorities who have been given jurisdiction are these three authorities. Chief commissioner, principal chief commissioner have not been added here. So this is probably once they are through with it. If they don't and we litigate, time will come, they will amend it, or probably in times to come, they will correct it if they want the principal chief commissioner or chief commissioner to levy penalty under 270 capital A. So these are the authorities who have got jurisdiction to levy penalty under section 270 capital A. Now, the erstwhile provision 271, as I mentioned earlier, had two charges: furnishing of inaccurate particulars of income and concealment of particulars of income, which were two mutually exclusive charges. A lot of litigation was there, whether satisfaction has been properly recorded or not, whether the satisfaction has been recorded for a clear charge, whether the penalty levied has been levied for a clear charge, or it is for two mutually exclusive charges, even to the extent whether in the penalty notice, whether it is vague or whether the assessing officer has struck off the inapplicable clause. So all this litigation was there because of these two charges. Now, on account of these technical, hyper-technical arguments, due to this a lot of litigation, and even in the matters which otherwise on merits deserved the levy of penalty, a lot of loss has been there has been a lot of loss to the revenue on account of these super technical charges. And therefore, to my mind, there was this anxiety to do away with these charges. And accordingly, this provision was drafted where they have now coined single term under reported income. So even this language of subsection 1 is quite different from this language of 270.11c, which had the word satisfied. Now in this, there is no concept of satisfaction that looks apparent from here. On the first blush, it looks like this, that number one, there is no, the language is quite different. Second, once the assessing officer makes the assessment, there is difference between your assessed and the processed income. The underreported income automatically arises. So there is no questioning of initiation or satisfaction. That is one argument available from the revenue side. Then there is no provision similar to subsection 1 capital A of 271, wherein the penalty could have been initiated despite the time barring of the proceeding of assessment may have been time barred. So that subsection 1A which we used to have in 271, there is no similar provision in 270 capital A. So one opinion is there that there may not be any requirement of satisfaction or initiation the levy of penalty in the assessment proceedings. But sir, with utmost respect, I would submit that despite this whole thought process, despite this effort being made to coin the single term, I would humbly submit that they have made a self-goal. The provisions, there are two charges still there, and there is requirement of initiation, and there is requirement of even recording satisfaction as well in the assessment order, in my humble submission. And as I go forward, I'll give the whole provision, and then I'll show in what manner I'm supporting my argument, how initiation and satisfaction is still there. Now, underreported income, we have understood. Underreported income is nothing but total of all the additions and disallowances that have been made by the assessing officer in the assessment, which have caused the difference between assessed income and processed income. Unless there is difference between the same, there would be no underreported income, and there would be no question of levy of penalty, even if there is addition or disallowance in the assessment order. Now, first and foremost, what I want to discuss is in what scenarios and what is the defense mechanism that is available to the assessee from levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Now, once assessment has been framed, 3-4 disallowances have been proposed by the assessing officer, and he computes your underreported income. The first endeavor of the assessee would be to cover these additions or disallowances in any of the 5 clauses which are within subsection 6 of 270 capital A. Subsection 6 is the defense mechanism which has been provided under section 270 capital A. Now this provision contains 5 exhaustive clauses, and it says that the if any addition, disallowance which is represented by the underreported income, if it is falling within any of these 5 clauses, then it will not be included in the underreported income. Now what are these clauses? The first clause, clause A, amount of income in respect of which assessee offers an explanation to the assessing officer. For sake of simplicity, I am taking the case of assessing officer. Assessee offers an explanation to the assessing officer. The explanation is satisfactory to it is to the satisfaction of the assessing officer that the explanation is bona fide, and assessee has disclosed all material facts to substantiate the explanation offered. So you may kindly recall explanation 1 capital B of 270.11c. This provision, this clause A of subsection 6 is somewhat similar, akin to that provision of explanation 1B. The onus is on the assessee, the burden is on the assessee to prove that the case is covered under clause A of subsection 6, that yes, I have given an explanation to the assessing officer, the explanation is bona fide, and assessee has disclosed all material facts to substantiate the explanation. If these conditions are fulfilled, then very well assessee can argue that this addition or disallowance shall not be included in the underreported income. So for example, 48.2 disallowance is being made by the assessing officer. Assessee has placed evidences on record. He has provided the invoice. He has provided the comparative quotes of the market price of the transaction. Still, assessing officer has made the disallowance. So if the assessee is able to prove that I have given an explanation, my explanation is bona fide, and I've substantiated my explanation, then my case is covered under clause A. Even if disallowance is made, still it does not become underreported income under as per clause A of subsection 6 and has to be excluded from underreported income. Now coming to clause B. Now sir, clause B, the parameters are that addition is made on estimate basis. The accounts of the assessee are correct and complete to the satisfaction of the assessing officer. However, the method employed is such that income cannot be deduced properly. So the condition is your accounts are correct and complete. AO is not disputing that. Addition is on estimate basis. But the method employed in the opinion of the assessing officer is such income is not properly deduced. Say for example, stock valuation. Assessee has applied LIFO method. AO says no, weighted average method I will apply. So he is changing the method. He is not disputing your accounts whether they are correct and complete or not. He is accepting your accounts, they are correct and complete. And addition is on estimate basis. Then clause B can be triggered. Even if addition is made, I am covered under clause B to say that even if the addition is made, this is not forming part of underreported income as per clause B. Similarly, in case of real estate assessees, say assessee has followed CCM method, A applies PCM. So the method is changing, but if the accounts are correct and complete and not disputed, and the addition is on estimate basis, then clause B can be taken as a defense to argue that the addition shall be not be included in the underreported income of the assessee. Now clause C. Clause C to my mind, sir, is somewhat, I would say, rather encourages suo motu disallowances. This is where disallowance is made on estimate basis again. And in this, the requirement is that the assessee himself or herself has estimated a lower amount of addition or disallowance on the same issue, and it has been disclosed in the computation of income, and all material facts have been disclosed in respect of the addition disallowance. Then even if the amount has been enhanced by the assessing officer, still, if these conditions are fulfilled, the assessee can plead that my case is covered under clause C. The most common prevalent example which I can give is, say, on account of personal expenses. Say assessee has disallowed 5% of the expenditure out of traveling, vehicle, administrative expenditures, all those expenditures, conveyance and all those. Assessee has suo motu disallowed 5%. AO says, no, I will estimate 15%. So if assessee is able to demonstrate, sir, see my disallowance was there in the computation of income, I have disclosed all material facts to the disallowance, to the addition made, then, and this enhancement is on estimate basis only, then my case is covered under clause C. Even if this allowance is made, still it cannot form part of the underreported income, and therefore no penalty under 270 capital A can be levied on such disallowance. Now sir, clause D. This is in respect of transfer pricing cases. Sir, transfer pricing cases, we are all aware, additions, adjustments are made on account of, say, acceptance or rejection of some comparables, some new comparables being brought by the TPO at the time of assessment, which might be not available at the earlier point of time when the assessee was filing return, or acceptance or rejection of some filters which have been applied, some new filters applied by TPO or filters applied by assessee have been rejected. So on these arguments, on these aspects, the adjustments are made. So it has been provided in clause D that if the assessee is able to show, demonstrate that number one, the assessee has maintained information and documentation as per section 92D, that is Redway's rule 10D, the information, the TP report documentation that is required to be maintained, that has been maintained by the assessee. Number one. Second, the assessee has declared the international transaction under chapter 10D, chapter 10. That is your form 3CEB, you have declared your transaction. And third, that the assessee has disclosed all material fact relating to the transaction. If these three parameters are fulfilled, even if addition or adjustment is made on account of comparables, on account of filters or some other issue, then also such addition, even if made, shall not form part of the underreported income under clause D of subsection 6 of 270 capital A. And it can be argued no penalty can be levied under 270 capital A. Now the last clause, sir. Clause E. This is more of an exception, I would say. Amount of undisclosed income referred to in section 271 AAB. Sir, you would kindly recall 271 AAB is a provision which provides that the assessing officer can levy penalty in respect of the undisclosed income. in respect of the specified previous years. Now, specified previous years, we are all aware in case of such cases, the years for which either return has not been filed, the due date for which the filing of return of which has not expired before on the date of search. So generally, the search year and the year before that are normally covered under the specified previous year under 271 AAB. And undisclosed income has been defined in that provision with respect to any income represented by any money, bullion, document, or anything which has not been recorded in the books of account before the date of search, or has not been disclosed to the income tax authority before the date of search. So that undisclosed income which has been defined under 271 AAB with respect to the specified years, that is years for which due date of filing of return has not expired on the date of search, qua that, since there is a specific provision 271 AAB for levy of penalty, those have been completely excluded from 270 capital A. But sir, kindly note, 271 AAB specified previous years are there, but the income which has been excluded from underreported income is only undisclosed income. You may kindly recall, in respect of these years, these are abated assessments. Complete assessment is open to the assessing officer. So he can make additions in respect of 40A, say 41.1, 40A3, dehoards any incriminating material found during course of search. So these additions, which are dehoards any incriminating material found during search, which are not represented as undisclosed income under 271 AAB, so even if they refer to the specified years, they will not be covered by 271 AAB. And therefore, in respect of such additions, such disallowances, which are not covered under undisclosed income, penalty, even if for specified years, would be levied under section 270 capital A. So, in respect of specified years, multiple penalties can be levied. Obviously, quite different issues. Undisclosed income under 271 AAB and other issues, since assessment is a complete assessment available to the assessing officer, who are those issues, dehoards incriminating material, under section 270 capital A. Now, say 3 or 4 disallowance additions made, assessee has been successfully able to show out of these 4 disallowance additions that 2 are covered under these 5 clauses. Now 2 are left. So if it is these 2 which are left would constitute underreported income, the penalty has been provided under subsection 7 at the rate of 50% of the tax payable on underreported income. That would be the penalty, I would say, a simpliciter underreported income, unless the case is brought within subsection 8 and 9. If the assessing officer is able to make out a case under subsection 8 and 9, and he makes out a case that it is underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, then it would attract penalty at the rate of 200% of the tax payable on the underreported income, as has been provided under subsection 8 of 270 capital A. So sir, simpliciter underreported income is one charge, and underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, which invites penalty at 200%, is the other charge to my mind. These are 2 different charges. Now, what is misreporting of income? That has been defined by way of exhaustive clauses under subsection 9. I'll just come to it in a minute. So 2 points I want to reiterate here is, number 1, that unless and until there is difference between the assessed income and the processed income, there is no underreported income, as has been defined under subsection 3. So until and unless underreported income arises, there can be no levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. This is a concept which comes out of this provision, new regime. Secondly, I want to submit that you may kindly recall the erstwhile provision of 270(11)(c). The penalty which the assessing officer could have levied ranged from 100% to 300%. So minimum was 100% and maximum was 300%. He could levy anywhere between 100 to 300. Whereas in this regime, either it is 0, 50% or 200%. There is no discretion available 50 to 200. There is no concept like this. If it is excluded in subsection 6, there is no penalty. There is no underreported income. If it is simpliciter underreported income, then 50% penalty. 50% of the tax payable. And if it is underreported income in consequence of misreporting, then it would be straightforward 200%. Now, subsection 9. Subsection 9 defines the situations where assessing officer will make out a case that it is a case of misreporting of income. Sir, kindly note in subsection 8, even if it is underreported or income in consequence of misreporting, it still remains underreported income. While levying the penalty shall be equal to 200% of the tax payable on underreported income. So, the single word that they have coined is, in any case, underreported income only, even if it is simpliciter or as a consequence of misreporting, but it remains your underreported income only. So, misreporting is a charge which is based on 6 exhaustive clauses, which may be overlapping in nature, but these are 6 exhaustive clauses provided under subsection 9. Now, these are the only clauses within which the assessing officer is required to make out a case for levy of penalty at the rate of 200% for misreporting of income under subsection 9. Obviously, there would be hardly any case which will not be covered under these 6 clauses. Now, this whole concept of subsection 9, to my mind, is similar, akin to the concept of explanation 1 capital A of 271, wherein the assessing officer was required to show that the facts material to the computation of income submitted by the assessee are false. So similar to that provision, explanation 1A, where the AO has to prove that the facts which are material to the computation of income are false. This is the same concept which I understand is there in misreporting of income. First and foremost, the burden to make out my case, to bring my case within subsection 9 lies on the shoulder of the assessing officer. Initial burden is on the assessing officer on the basis of the material on record to show that the case is covered under subsection 9, any of these clauses. Sir, these clauses are overlapping in nature, and as we'll discuss each clause one by one, we will see that in a given set of facts, more than one clause may apply. But even if it is overlapping, to my mind, what the assessing officer has to crystallize in his order is that it is underreported income in consequence of misreporting. He may apply one or more than one clause that will depend on the facts of each case. Now, what are these clauses? Clause A, misrepresentation or suppression of facts. Now, misrepresentation, if I derive meaning from the earlier jurisprudence of furnishing of inaccurate particulars of income, somewhat similar to that furnishing of inaccurate particulars, misrepresentation, and suppression is that something you conceal. So somewhat similar to concealment of particulars of income. So we can get good guidance from the earlier charges of furnishing inaccurate and concealment to this charge of misrepresentation or suppression of facts in this clause A. Now, sir, as I discussed, there can be several situations where addition or disallowance, despite made by the assessing officer or discussed in the assessment order, it may not lead to difference in the assessed and processed income. Now, with respect to this clause A, let me just give you a small example. A closely held company, private limited company, closely held company gives advance to its shareholder who is having more than 10% of the voting rights, and such advance is covered within the net of 2 subsection 22 clause E, deemed dividend. Now, to avoid such a deemed dividend being attracted, the assessee company camouflages this transaction to show it as a transaction of commercial expediency to get away with it. Now, during the course of assessment, assessing officer asks, all right, prove me the commercial expediency of giving this advance to your shareholder. Now, on examination, AO finds that this is a bogus facade created by the assessee. It is a case of deemed dividend, and accordingly, he adjudicates and comes to a conclusion that this amount advanced to the shareholder is a deemed dividend. But sir, kindly note, where will this addition be made? Now, deemed dividend, Honorable Supreme Court in Maduram Housing held that the deemed dividend can be brought to tax in the hands of the registered shareholder. So despite misrepresentation by the assessee company, the addition will be made in the hands of the shareholder. So in case of the company, there is no change between the processed income and the assessed income, since no addition is being made in the hands of the company. The addition of on account of deemed dividend would be made in the hands of the shareholder, as has been held by the Honorable Supreme Court in various judgments. So, despite this misrepresentation being there, since there is no addition in the hands of the company, since there is no difference between the assessed income and the processed income of the company, there would be no question of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Coming to clause B, sir. Now, clause B provides failure to record investments in the books of account. Now, reading this phrase, failure to record investments, the first thing that comes to my mind, the first question which I ask to myself is where the addition will be made. So, where there is a failure to record investment in the books of accounts, to my understanding, the addition would be made under section 69. Now, you may kindly recall, and I don't think so anybody would forget section 115 BBE amended by Taxation Laws Second Amendment Act 2016, wherein the additions, the amount which are brought to tax under section 68 to 69D are being charged under section 115 BBE, for which the tax rate was increased from 30 to 60%. And in that act in December 2016, a new penalty provision under section 271 AAC was introduced, which provided for 10% of penalty. And that is how we compute 60% plus 10% penalty and all that such, which goes on to about 80-84%. So all the additions which are made under section 68 to 69D, if they have to be charged under section 115 BBE, for which a specific provision of 271 AAC has been provided in the statute for levy of penalty. And you may kindly note, section 271 AAC specifically provides that no penalty under section 270 capital A would be levied to the amounts which have been brought to tax under section 115 BBE. So if that is the position, then what is the relevance of this clause B? In my humble submission, sir, this is a case of mistake on account of, I believe, a gloss over lapse that has occurred, because this provision of 270 capital A was introduced by Finance Act 16 in early 2016, whereas this provision 271 AAC was brought in December 16. So it is more of a case of a omission on the part of the legislature. In times to come, this may be deleted, because this provision, in my humble submission, has no relevance now. Any addition on such score would be dealt with penalty under section 271 AAC. Coming to clause C, claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. So if the assessee has claimed any expenditure, and on being asked by the assessing officer, alright, prove the expenditure, genuineness of the expenditure, and assessee has not provided any evidence to substantiate it, then assessing officer will make out the case of covering it as a case of underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income. Now, there can be situations, even in this case also, say for example, capital gain. Assessee has shown capital gain in the computation of income. While computing the capital gain consideration, there was cost of acquisition, there was cost of improvement, capital gain was there, and assessee claimed reduction under section 54F. And there was some amount of reduction which was unutilized. Now, during assessment, the assessing officer has disallowed some portion of cost of improvement on account of that expenditure has not been substantiated. On account of this disallowance, what happens is my capital gain is enhanced. But sir, there is 54F which is unutilized, and I am able to utilize it, and there is no capital gain which is ultimately charged to tax. So despite there may be my enhancement in capital gain, but since I had deduction available, ultimately there is no difference between processed income and the assessed income. And if there is no difference between the two, under subsection 3, there would be no underreported income. So even if I am not able to substantiate my expenditure, if there is no difference between the assessed and the processed income, there is no underreported income that arises. And once there is no underreported income that arises, there would be no case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Similarly, it can happen in the case of eligible assessees who have 100% deductions to their business profits. Say some disallowances made in respect of some expenditure, but ultimately it will go on to enhance the business, swell the business profits only, for which 100% deduction is available. Ultimately, there would be no difference between assessed and processed income. So, no underreported income would arise and no penalty under section 270 capital A can be levied on that score. Sir, clause E. Now, clause E provides that failure to record any receipt in books of account having a bearing on total income. Now, sir, as I have already been submitting, that under this new regime, unless and until there is difference between the assessed income and the processed income, so that requires that there has to be a bearing on the total income. So unless that is there, there would be no case of levy of penalty. So the concept in the provision itself, 270 capital A, even in the computation of underreported income is there, that it has to have a bearing on the total income. So to my mind, in clause E specifically qualifying it with this doesn't help that much, but in the light of the approach, the requirement of making it more clear to bring more clarity, certainty, so it was thought more wise to clarify it. To probably, since the word used here is receipt, receipt can be capital or revenue. So that is why they may have thought it fit to clarify that such receipt should have a bearing on total income. But all in all, as I've been discussing, to levy penalty, there should be underreported income, and for underreported income, there should be difference between the assessed income and processed income. And therefore, any addition, disallowance which is sought to be made by the assessing officer, it has to have bearing on the total income. However, in clause E, it has been provided that if the assessee, say, for example, out of book sales are found, and those sales have not been recorded in the books of account, then if those are added by the assessing officer, in clause E, he would levy penalty for at the rate of 200% of the tax payable on such underreported income. Now coming to clause F, failure to report any international transaction. So kindly recall, clause D that we discussed as a defense mechanism required the assessee that you have disclosed it, you have maintained documents, and you have disclosed all material facts. Clause F, if the assessee has at the outset failed to even report the international transaction, and if subsequently it comes to the notice of the assessing officer that there is some international transaction done by the assessee, which is then subsequently referred to the TPO and ALP adjustment is made, then penalty under section 270 capital A under clause F can be levied on account of underreported income as a consequence of misreporting of income. However, there can be situations where even if the transaction was not reported, assessing officer refers the matter to TPO, and despite examination, the TPO finds that the transaction is at arm's length price. If that is the case, that the transaction is at arm's length price, then even if the assessee has not reported the transaction, since there is no addition, there is no adjustment, there would be no difference between the assessed and the processed income. And since there is no difference, there is no question of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Obviously, penalty for under section 271 AA for not disclosing the transaction, for not declaring the transaction, that may be levied, but there is no adjustment to the income. There is no underreported income that arises, and therefore there is no question of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A on this account also. So sir, under these 6 clauses of subsection 9 of 270 capital A, the burden, as I said, is on the assessing officer to make out a case under subsection 9. And you may kindly recall, like in the earlier provision, if the assessing officer seeks to levy penalty at say more than 100% in the regime of 271(1)(c), say 150%, 200%. So jurisprudence was there that the assessing officer was required to give a speaking order and had to give a reason why he is levying penalty at a higher rate. So similarly, to my mind, number one, the burden is on the assessing officer. In any case, his order has to be a speaking order, that how he is covering on the basis of the facts of the case under subsection 9 to make it a case of underreported income as a consequence of misreporting under these 6 clauses of subsection 9. Now, sir, certain interesting situations that I could come across under this provision. Now,
Somil, can I say something?
Yes, sir.
कैसे हो? Good
I'm
evening.
good, sir. With your blessings. Thank you, sir.
I think ये clause D बीच में से omit हो गई है, making of false entries.
Yes, sir. I'll just discuss it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Clause D, recording of any false entry in the books of accounts. Sir, false entry after the amendment, the provision of 271 AAD in the Statute by Finance Act 2020, the first thing that comes to our mind is that provision, which we'll discuss just a little later. Say, assessee has claimed some purchases in his books of accounts under clause D on account of purchases. Now, assessing officer finds that the invoices are false or bogus. This transaction is bogus. And he finds that this false entry has been recorded by the assessee in the books of accounts. So if he is able to substantiate on the basis of evidence on record, then he can make it a case of false entry in the books of account, and accordingly, he can levy penalty at the rate of 200% of the tax payable. Sir, kindly note, and there has been a lot of debate and question that whether 270A, whether this clause penalty can be levied under 270 capital is still in respect of false entry despite a specific provision is there under 271 AAD. I will address this question there, but over here I would mention one thing, that in this provision in 270 capital A, the penalty which is being levied for underreporting income. So by recording the false entry, the income which has been underreported by the assessee, that has now been brought to tax by the assessing officer. Since you had underreported on income, this default of the assessee is being penalized under section 270 capital A. So if the assessing officer is able to bring material on record, prove on the basis of the fact that it is a case of false entry, then he would cover such case as underreported income as a consequence of misreporting of income and levy penalty at 200%. Now coming to those interesting situations, thank you Puri sir. I'll come to those situations. Number one, sir, as I mentioned, that underreported income is difference between the assessed income and the processed income. So that is the situation. What about the adjustments and additions which are made in 143(1)A processing? Sir, we are all aware about the whole fiasco of disallowance of employees' contribution to ESIPF that has been made writ large by CPC under 143(1)A. Now, this provision where return has been filed and it has been processed, then the underreported income has been computed as difference between assessed and processed. So what the legislature has sought to do is that no penalty under 270A has been formulated for the adjustments which are made under 143(1)A. So whatever adjustments on account of those 5-6 adjustments which are there in 143(1)A, that is on account of some apparent incorrect claim or account of some disallowance which has been reported in the tax audit report, however not made in the computation, that has been disallowed under in the processing of 143(1). So qua such adjustments which are being made under 143(1), no penalty has been envisaged under section 270 capital A. Probably the reason behind that, to my mind, may be that if something is so apparent from the return filed by the assessee and can be corrected from there, and adjustment or addition has been made from there only, then the assessee never had the intention to hide anything. And therefore, the adjustments, the amounts which are adjusted in 143(1)A processing has not been visited with penalty under section 270 capital A. Sir, in my humble submission, this logic, in case of where patent, apparent, blatant errors are committed in respect of amounts which cannot be allowed, then there does not seem to be any justification for not levying penalty. But probably since a lot of things are being processed by CPC under 143(1)A, they want to bring more and more load on this system-based concept. So it was thought fit not to levy penalty in respect of the adjustments which are made under section 143(1). The second thing which I want to highlight here is, sir, in respect of 153A. So you may kindly recall, in respect of the underreported income in cases where return has not been filed, the situations envisaged under subsection 2 and 3 till now is in case of return not filed or return filed for the first time under section 148. In such cases, the income assessed, obviously subject to basic exemption limit, would be treated as your underreported income. But sir, what about the assessees in case of such cases who have not filed return of income till now, and in respect of the notice under 153 capital A, for the first time they are filing their returns? That position has not been envisaged under this provision till now. So in respect of the income which is shown by such assessees, obviously in respect of the specified previous years for undisclosed income, as we discussed, there is a specific penalty provision. But obviously other 4 earlier years which are mentioned in 153A, so if the assessee files a return for the first time and if he shows some income in that return, say for example, in the return filed under 153 capital A, assessee shows income of 50 lakh rupees. AO makes addition of 30 lakh rupees. Assesses is at 80 lakh rupees. So the underreported income would be 30 lakh rupees in case of 153A. However, as opposed in case of 148 cases, if the return is being filed for the first time, and even if the assessee shows 50 lakh rupees, as per subsection 2 and 3, the underreported income would be 80 lakh rupees. I am not considering the basic exemption limit here. So this situation of 153A assessment where the assessee files return for the first time and shows some income in the return, that has not been visited with penalty in this provision. To my mind, there seems no reason for leaving out such assessees, and this seems to be a case of omission. Even I would point out that initially when this provision was brought, even this subsequent part where return has been furnished for the first time under 148 was not there. So this was also brought by way of amendment. So in times to come, we may see amendment where section 153 capital A may also be added, because there seems no logic to leave out such cases.
But Somil, when they file first time return under section 153A,
yes sir,
so that is covered by clause B, because it is a or where return has been furnished for the first time under section 148.
Sir, only 148 is covered. But what about in? Yes sir, or
See, where no return has been furnished or where the return has been furnished for the first time under section 148.
But sir, when 153 assessment he is doing, he is asking me for the return. I have furnished the return and he is making assessment under section 153 read with 143(3). So it is a case where I have filed the return, he is assessing that return.
I know, but it is for the first time. Again, it
Yeah,
will be for the no return has been furnished.
I understand, sir, but the situation of first time is under section 148 only, which has been envisaged in my humble submission, sir.
Okay.
153A for the first time has not been envisaged here.
Okay.
In subsection 2 and 3, where computation has been given over here also, sir, for the first time under 148. So that is why this I could figure out, and there is no logic for that. It is a case of plain omission, which in times to come would be corrected in my humble submission. Now another situation, sir. What about the situation like, for example, assessee has brought forward losses. Now I have brought forward losses of say 60 lakh rupees. The assessee files income and the current year income is 50 lakh rupees. Now income is filed, total income 50 lakh rupees, brought forward losses set off 50 lakh rupees, the returned income is nil. Assuming that processed also is nil. Now say assessing officer makes addition of 8 lakh rupees. Once he makes addition of 8 lakh rupees, my total income is 58 lakh rupees. My brought forward losses which are set off to the extent of 58 lakh rupees. So still my assessed income is nil. So if the addition is such and it is covered by my brought forward losses, then there is no difference between processed and the assessed income. And again, no underreported income would arise, sir. Current year losses, it has been provided. If the current year losses are reduced, that has been covered. But if my brought forward losses are sufficient enough to cover the addition, and ultimately there is no difference between processed and the assessed income, then there is no case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A in my humble submission. However, a situation may arise in the subsequent year when I have taken benefit of that loss in the subsequent year, which because of which the income will reduce. Then the levy of penalty under section 270 capital A may come into picture. But in this year, despite there being addition, once it is set off by my brought forward losses, there would not be any case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Now, sir, a lot of debate is there. What would happen, say, if I revise my return? So, sir, in my humble submission, once the return is revised, and even if some further income is shown in the revised return, if it is as per in accordance with law, then no penalty can be levied qua that income shown in the revised return. However, sir, kindly note, every revised return is not in accordance with law. Subsection 5 of section 139 requires that the revision should be on account of discovery of any wrong statement or omission on part of the assessee. So, if the assessing officer is able to show that there is no omission, there is no discovery on part of the assessee of any wrong statement, and he discards your return to be a valid revised return under subsection 5 of 139, it would be incumbent on the assessing officer to prove, to show that, and to come to a conclusion that the revised return is not a valid return. Unless he does that, he will not be able to levy penalty. He will not be able to levy penalty on the income shown in the revised return. So, 139.5, if the revised return is valid as per the provision and the assessing officer does not dispute that, then penalty under section 270 capital A cannot be levied qua such income shown in the revised return. And same would be my submission in respect of the belated returns also. Now, sir, coming to subsection 4 and 5. Subsection 4 and 5 envisages a situation, contemplates a situation where intangible additions in respect of the earlier years on which no penalty has been levied, if it is being taken as advantage by the assessee to use such intangible addition of the earlier year on which no penalty has been levied to explain the source of any investment, any deposit, any receipt in the current year, then such amount which is attributable to cover such receipt, deposit or investment would be treated as underreported income of that year for which that intangible addition relates. Sir,
I think this provision was earlier there also.
Yes, sir. This provision
not there up to 1980, but it came in somewhere in 81, 82. And
yes, sir.
It stays.
So it is akin to explanation 2 to section 271(1)(c, sir. As sir pointed out by Khivani, sir, it is somewhat similar to that provision only. So, sir, just I'll take a small example. Say in assessment year 24-25, assessing officer assesses substantiating some investment which appears in that assessment year, say by way of any intangible addition which was made in assessment year 18-19 or 17-18. I'll take 17-18. So that intangible addition on account of say GP additions was made on which no penalty was levied in assessment year 17-18. That addition is sought to be used as a source in the subsequent assessment year. So since no penalty has been levied for assessment year 17-18, then even if the investment appears in that year, the assessing officer will treat this intangible addition as underreported income of assessment year 17-18. But the point I want to highlight here is this, sir. Obviously, subsection 4 and 5 provide that underreported income will relate to assessment year 17-18. That is there, similar to explanation 2 to 271(1)(c). But the question I want to highlight here is this: whether while making assessment for AY 24-25, will he be able to open the case of assessment year 17-18? Sir, as I mentioned earlier, Similar to section 2, subsection 1 capital A of 271, which provided for initiation of penalty even in case of proceedings which have been rendered as time barred in the earlier regime of 271. There is no such provision, enabling provision under 270 capital A. So this blockage of time bar that would be hit in this case, unless there is enabling provision similar to subsection 1A of 271, to my mind, he will not be able to levy penalty for assessment year 1718 subsequently. Second issue which I want to highlight here is, sir, say in 1718, penalty was initiated on the intangible addition, and subsequently it was deleted on, say, technical, super technical grounds. So on account of penalty notice being vague. So can the revenue argue that, sir, penalty was deleted? It is a case of penalty not being levied? To my mind, sir, it is a case where penalty was levied. Even if it was subsequently deleted, then it cannot be equivalent to a case where no penalty was levied, and therefore penalty for AY 1718 cannot be revisited in such scenario, in my humble submission. Now, sir, what would happen? Say assessee is explaining this intangible addition, it relates to assessment year 1617. Now, if it is 1617 assessment year, then obviously the earlier provision would apply, as I started in the beginning, that this provision 270 applies from AY 1718. AY 1617 has the enabling provision of subsection 1 capital A, which provides that even if the assessment proceedings are time barred, the penalty can be initiated. So even in the assessments which are assessments carried out subsequent to assessment year 1718 onwards, in such cases of intangible additions which relate to the earlier year being assessment year 1617 and prior years, then the penalty would come back, would be levied under 270(11)(c) only in respect of explanation 2. And accordingly, in assessment subsequent to AY 1718, in some scenarios, 270(11)(c) can also appear. So, sir, these are these couple of interesting situations which I could figure out that came in under section 270 capital A. Now, with this provision, immunity concept was also brought in the statute 270 AA. Now, 270 AA provides for immunity from penalty under 270 capital A and initiation of prosecution under section 276C or 276 CC. The conditions as required in this provision are that the assessee is required to pay the tax and interest as per the assessment order, as per the demand notice within the period specified in the demand notice, that is to be paid. Second, no appeal has been filed by the assessee against the assessment order. Now, the time limit for filing the application is within 1 month from the end of the month in which the assessment order is received. Rule 129, and the form is Form 68 for filing the application to the assessing officer. So, if the assessing officer is satisfied that the assessee has paid the tax and interest and no appeal has been filed, after the time limit of filing the appeal, after the expiry of the period of filing the appeal under 249, the assessing officer will grant immunity to the assessee. But, sir, kindly note two things. Number one, the immunity would be granted only in respect of additions or disallowances which are not covered under misreporting of income. So, whichever cases the assessing officer seeks to cover under subsection 9 of 270 capital A, there is no immunity provided for that. The provision provide grant immunity and initiation where the proceeding for penalty under 270 capital A has not been initiated under the circumstances referred to in subsection 9 of 270 capital A. So, two things I want to point out here. Number one, the time limit has been provided, has been formulated from the assessment order, and the assessee is expected to file for immunity only if the proceeding has not been initiated for penalty under subsection 9 of 270 capital A. So, to my mind, for the assessee to know that the one penalty has been initiated Number two, it has been initiated for a specific charge under subsection 9 of 270 capital A. It has to be there in the assessment order. So the requirement of initiation of penalty and the charge of subsection 9 or not, or simpliciter underreported income, has to be clarified in the assessment order itself. That is what my argument I wish to support from this provision. Secondly, sir, kindly see the explanation after subsection 3 of 270 capital A. This explanation defines preceding order. Now this preceding order is in respect of the reassessment, recomputation of income cases, where the underreported income has been defined as difference between the income now reassessed and the income assessed as per the preceding order. So the preceding order has been defined means an order immediately preceding the order. This order is the current reassessment order. Order during which course of which penalty under section 1 has been initiated. So even this in this subsection, in this section 270 capital A itself shows that there is a requirement of initiation of penalty proceedings. So sir, in my humble submission, initiation requirement is there, and secondly, simplicity underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income under subsection 9 are the two charges which I believe have been created under section 270 capital A. So all those arguments which we used to have, because of which there has been ample litigation on those technical grounds, to my mind surface again, and they are very well available, and the assessing officer has to crystallize the charge, and to my mind has to even record the satisfaction also in the assessment order for initiating penalty under section 270 capital A. So sir, with this I'll conclude 270 capital A. Just one more thing I want to highlight here is that a number of times question arises, sir, what will happen if the assessing officer is given an application for immunity and then subsequently he rejects it and the time limit has gone for filing of appeal? So sir, 249 subsection 4, where time limit is given, a proviso has been added there, and the time which the assessing officer has taken in disposing of your application shall be excluded. So it has been provided that the time period from the date on which application is filed to the date on which rejection of the application is received by the assessee would be excluded from the calculation of 30 days for filing the appeal. So in case say assessee has filed the application on 20th day of receiving the order, subsequently after 40 days the assessing officer rejects the application. So after receiving the rejection of the application, 10 days period would be roughly there for filing the appeal. So that has been provided in the act.
सोमिल, मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है.
Yes sir.
असेसमेंट ऑर्डर में वो कभी-कभी तो ये लिखते हैं that penalty proceedings are.
Sir, your voice is cracking. Is it with me, Nitika ji? Could you follow?
Initiated separately, or कभी, am I clear?
Hello, am I audible?
Somil, you are audible. Atul sir's voice is not audible.
Sir, kindly repeat, sir.
What I am saying is that in
Yes,
the
sir.
assessment order,
Yes, sir.
sometimes they say the penalty proceedings are being initiated separately.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes their rights have been initiated separately.
Yes, sir.
तो जहाँ पर तो are being आया वहाँ तो आप कवर हो जाओगे, और जहाँ have been लिखा है वहाँ पर क्या प्रॉब्लम होगी?
सर, इन माय हम्बल सबमिशन, जैसा कि ऑनरेबल कर्नाटका हाई कोर्ट ने मंजुनाथन कॉटन एंड स्पिनिंग केस में 359 ITR पेज 565, आई विल रिपीट, 359 ITR पेज 565, उन्होंने कहा था कि डायरेक्शन हैज टू बी अ प्रॉपर डायरेक्शन. सिंपली राइटिंग पेनल्टी हैज बीन इनिशिएटेड इज नॉट अ सफिशिएंट डायरेक्शन. वो सर अलग फ्रेजेस जो यूज करते हैं, शैल बी इनिशिएटेड, हैज बीन इनिशिएटेड और इज बीइंग इनिशिएटेड, दिस इज नॉट सफाइस as per Honorable Karnataka High Court, which they have held. और सर जैसा कि हमने देखा, the charge has to be discernible from the assessment order, and again in 270 capital A the two charges surface: underreported income simpliciter underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income. So they have to crystallize in the assessment order for what they are initiating the penalty. As the assessee also has to know whether he can go for immunity or not. If today they don't clarify and I file the application and they say no, it is for misreporting. So will that be justice to the assessee? If he is not being made aware in the assessment order that what is it being initiated for?
Penalized for.
This rejection is also appealable?
No, sir. There is no appeal against it. That is given in the provision itself. There is no appeal. But obviously, constitutional remedy writ is there, sir.
That it is there.
That is there. But appeal is not there. No 263, no 264, sir. Nothing is there. So, sir, coming to section 271 AAD. Now, 271 AAD, this was introduced by Finance Act 2020. Another addition to a already existing large family of penalty proceedings. This provision, I would humbly submit that it throws several interpretation and several harsh provisions have been created. So, what is this provision? In a nutshell, 271 AAD provides for levy of penalty in respect of false entry or omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such assessee to evade tax liability. If it is found during the course of the assessment by the assessing officer that such assessee has recorded a false entry or has omitted the entry which is relevant for computation in the books of accounts maintained by the assessee, then penalty equivalent to the amount of such false entry or omitted entry or aggregate of such false or omitted entry would be levied by the assessing officer. So such the assessee under subsection 1 I would refer as first mentioned person in my deliberations. Now this false entry has been defined by way of an explanation under this provision, whereas omission of any entry has not been defined. Obviously we'll take cue from memorandum and the clauses and the other interpretations which are available. Now subsection 2 of this provision further provides that the assessing officer can levy penalty on such other person, on any other person who has caused the first mentioned person to make a false entry, or who has caused such person, first mentioned person, to make a to omit the entry, or who himself omits the entry. Then in respect of such other person also, the assessing officer can levy penalty under subsection 2 of 271 AAD of the amount equal to the false entry or omitted entry. Now this provision has been brought with effect from 1st April 2020. A lot of debate has been there that is it retrospective? By saying that it is effective from 1st April 2020, is it applicable from assessment year 2021? Sir, in my humble submission, to my mind, this provision which has been made effective from 1st April 2020 is applicable for defaults committed on or after 1st April 2020. So, it would be applicable from assessment year 21-22 in my humble submission. There is a fear in some part of the society that it is retrospective. Obviously, different views can be there. But in my humble submission, penalty provisions cannot be retrospective. A provision which has been made effective from 1st April 2020, to my mind, it will apply on defaults committed on or after 1st April 2020. Now, before we delve into how and what defaults have been envisaged, the first thing to my mind.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, sir.
ये false entry जो है ये तो 271 में भी थी, अंडर रिपोर्टिंग में भी थी.
जी सर.
तो ये इसमें दोबारा है. That means the so two penalties will be liable for the same offence.
Sir, मैं आपका question I'll note it and I'll deal it in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I'll deal it, sir. ये मैंने वहाँ भी highlight किया था कि वहाँ भी false entry, यहाँ भी false entry है. I'll deal it, sir. Just give me a couple of minutes. So, sir, this provision which has been brought by under section 271 AAD, penalty for false entry, in my mind, a lot of guidance is there in the memorandum. Why this provision has been brought. Sir, after the memorandum says, and in the memorandum, the title which has been given also is penalty for fake invoice. So the memorandum provides that after the GST coming into effect system, there have been a number of cases of fraudulent claim of ITC, input tax credit. What is this fraud which has been highlighted in this memorandum? That the registered suppliers obtain fake and false invoices, and on that basis ITC is claimed to reduce the GST liability. This invoice which contains this GST input is neither paid nor intended to be paid, and it is generally issued by racketeers, people who are involved in this malpractice of merely issuing invoices, and they are not carrying out any actual business. So to curb such fraudulent practice of claiming input tax credit, and the language used there is to curb to tackle such practice, it has to be dealt with a provision, and accordingly 271 AAD has been formulated. So sir, to my mind, memorandum itself shows two situations that sought to be tackled with it. Number one, registered suppliers, assessees who are claiming this fraudulent ITC and booking bogus purchases with the help of these false and fake invoices. And secondly, they want to catch hold of the racketeers, people who are involved in this racket, who are not carrying on any business but are only issuing these invoices. So these two objects come out of that memorandum. So in light of this, to my mind, this provision has to be interpreted, has to be appreciated. Now sir, coming to Sir Atul sir's question. Sir, 270 capital A also had clause D for false entry, and this provision also has default for false entry. The question is whether the assessee can argue the controversial principle of rule of double jeopardy. So sir, to answer that, the first phrase of this provision, without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. So by this phrase, the legislature has sought to keep away any feeble attempt of any argument being framed on the basis of rule of double jeopardy. So this provision of 271 AAD is in addition to other provisions of this act, number one. Secondly, say for example, which I took during 270A also, assessee has made some purchases and he has debited the purchases which is based on some invoice. AO makes investigation and comes to a finding that this is a bogus purchase based on fake and false invoices. So once this is false entry, assessing officer will make disallowance of purchases and he will make addition to your income. So under 270 capital A, addition would be made and penalty would be levied for underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income. So sir, to my mind, the penalty in 270 capital A is being levied for the income that has been underreported on the tax which has not been properly paid, the amount which the assessee has underreported. That default is being penalized under 270 capital A. Whereas in 271 AAD, the very act of the assessee in using the fake and false invoice is being penalized. That you used or intended to use the fake invoice, this act of yours is being penalized. So the default which has been envisaged under 270 capital A and 271 AAD are two different defaults. So in my humble submission, in fact, strictly speaking, there is no double jeopardy. Sir, this is not the first penalty in which is dehoards your income. Penalty under 271A, 271AA, 269, 271DA even if addition may not be made in the assessment, still penalties can be levied. So similarly, 271 AAD is a default, is a penalty which is being levied for the default of use or intention to use the fake or false invoice. Whereas 270A for that matter is on account of on account of the assessee under reporting the income on account of the tax evasion.
I would like to seek a clarification. You mentioned that this is on account of GST bills which are being issued.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The purchases. Now
Yes,
there
sir.
is a bill of commission which is non-GST.
Yes, sir.
Then will it be applicable?
Sir,
It is a commission paid. You know what the market says, what the market does. But it's non-GST bill. It does not
सर ये
involve.
चीज़ें रिकॉर्ड हो रही हैं खिवानी साहब, ये चीज़ें रिकॉर्ड हो रही हैं कि पे कर दे हो.
तो कोई बात नहीं.
It's a false entry, yes. It's a matter of false entry by way of
False
commission or
entry is
something.
false entry. अब वो
By way of commission or purchase or anything, it's a false
Whatever
entry.
है.
If it issues.
और फिर वो कैपिटल वाली भी आ जाएंगी.
सर मतलब there is a wide जो plain language है, a wide spectrum is sought to be covered.
Everything is subject.
जो मेमोरेंडम है वो स्पेक्ट्रम काफी नैरो करने की कोशिश करता है. सो मतलब this is something which in my opinion with times to come will evolve through jurisprudence. Where exactly will they stop with 271 AAD? Number one, will they stop only in cases of invoices and only the जैसा आपने बताया capital, loan, gifts, all those accommodation alleged entries that are out of 271 AAD, or it is further narrowed to GST cases only and expenses which may be called as false entry.
Now again, you mentioned about gifts.
Am I audible, sir?
yes,
Yes, you are audible. You
Right.
mentioned about gifts received.
Yes, sir.
The assessee doesn't
Sir,
maintain
just
any
sir,
account.
sir, just
Gifts are
So-
personal, and the
so,
assessee
sir-
doesn't maintain any books of accounts.
yes, sir. Sir, I'm coming to each limb, sir. I'll come to each limb. तो मैं
Okay.
एक बार अपना डिस्कशन सर अपने पॉइंट्स रख दूं, then I'll come back to you, sir.
Better.
तो सर
Yes.
जैसे मैंने बताया कि डबल जेपार्डी के आर्गुमेंट हम बात करते हैं सर, स्ट्रिक्टली टू माय माइंड this 271 AAD is for a specific default and other penalty provisions the host can work, and this provision also will be in addition to the penalty or other actions which are taken under the act. Say for example falsification of books of accounts, some action is taken or taxes are levied, so nobody can be heard saying कि sir एक एक्शन मेरे अगेंस्ट सिमिलर डिफॉल्ट पे हो चुका है एक्ट में, आप 271 AAD नहीं लगा सकते. That is not the case, sir. This provision is without prejudice to any other provision, and this is in addition to other provisions of the Income Tax Act. So the second issue that I take up is that what is the which proceedings during which this penalty can be levied. Now the phrase used is that during any proceeding under this act. So sir, in my humble submission, the proceedings have to be under the Income Tax Act, and in my humble submission, this default can surface in any proceeding. It can be appellate proceeding, it can be penalty proceeding, it can be TDS proceeding. Any proceeding there can be in which the default can be found. However, the authority for levying penalty is the assessing officer. So if the authority who has found the default is other than the assessing officer, then such authority would be required to refer the matter to the assessing officer, who will then initiate penalty and then levy penalty under section 271 AAD. Now, as I mentioned, proceeding have to be proceeding under this act in which the default is to be found, in which the default has to be found has been contemplated. Now the question arises, what will happen? Say investigations are being done by SFIO or GST authorities. Then what is the position? If they get to know, they find is false and fake invoices have been used. So to my mind, this proceeding itself cannot lead to levy of penalty. Obviously, GST authority, SFIO authority, or any other authority for that matter, they can refer the matter to the assessing officer. Exchange of information between the various regulatory authorities, that is there, that is available. But on receipt of the information with the assessing officer, first and foremost, he would be required to initiate a proceeding under this act within the four corners of law. And if during the course of that proceeding he finds that yes, the default is there, then he can initiate and levy penalty under section 271(8). So there are arguments that a strict interpretation should be there. Only assessment proceeding should be covered for levy of penalty during which default can be found. So to my mind, there seemed no reason to give a restrictive interpretation to the phrase of during any proceeding under this act. Obviously, the proceeding has to be under the Income Tax Act, but that proceeding can be any proceeding. However, the authority by which who can levy penalty under 271(8) is the assessing officer only. Now, sir, kindly see who is the assessing officer who can levy penalty. Now, under subsection 1, the assessing officer of the assessee who has committed the default as envisaged for false entry or omission of an entry, on such assessee, the assessing officer will levy penalty. Subsection 2 further goes on to provide that this assessing officer of the first mentioned person can levy penalty on the other person also, who can be covered under subsection 2, who has caused to make the false entry by the first mentioned person, or who has himself omitted the entry, or who has made the first mentioned person to omit the entry. So this assessing officer can levy penalty on the assessee who has made the default in the books of account, as well as he can levy penalty on the other person who has caused the first mentioned person to make the false entry under subsection 2. Obviously, the assessing officer will then give the required opportunity to that assessee also, to that other person also, as per the principles of natural justice. And once the order is passed under subsection 3 of section 274, he would then send the copy of the order to the jurisdiction assessing officer of that assessee. Now, as Khivani sir mentioned, where is the default envisaged? So, sir, 271(8) contemplates that the default of false entry or omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to evade tax liability has to be there in the books of accounts maintained by such person. So, the default has been envisaged in the books of accounts maintained. Now, the question arises, sir, what about the assessee that who, though required to maintain books of accounts, has not maintained books of accounts? Whether 271(8) penalty can be levied? Sir, in my humble submission, the provision requires that the default should be found in the books of accounts maintained. So, even though he was required to maintain books of accounts, he has not maintained, obviously penalty under 271(a) would be levied, depending on the facts of the case. But in the absence of books of accounts, no penalty under section 271(8) can be levied. The second question that comes to my mind on account of books of account is this: what will happen in case of assessees under 44AD who are filing under the presumptive taxation regime? The law provides they are not required to maintain books of accounts. So if an assessee who is not required to maintain books of accounts, at the outset, obviously, the provision of 271(8) will not be applicable, as the default is required to be found in the books of accounts. However, in my humble submission, sir, say if an assessee submits his return under 44AD and he claims turnover on a respective amount, and on being asked to substantiate that turnover, furnishes invoices, furnishes some details, and assessing officer finds that the invoices are fake and false invoices, then if this turnover, which is backed by such fake and false invoices, to my mind, this limited detail, even if may have been maintained by such assessee who has filed return under 44AD, in my humble submission, would constitute books of accounts for the purpose of 271(8). And I see no reason why such penalty cannot be levied on such person who claims turnover based on these documents, invoices which are fake and false. Then 271(8) for the purpose of it, such document details may be limited can constitute books of accounts as defined under 212A of the Income Tax Act, which has also been defined in an inclusive manner. For the purpose of subsection 2, obviously there is no requirement of books of accounts. Penalty can be levied on such other person, the horse, books of accounts being there or not, once it is established that such person has caused to make the first mentioned person the omission or false entry in that books of accounts. Now, another question that I want to address, I would raise, what will happen, say, false entry, fake invoices are found? Obviously, it would be a perfect case for rejection of books of accounts. I would say assessing officer does not reject the books of accounts and he has disallowed the purchases and he has held that the purchases were backed by fake and false invoices. So, sir, can it be argued that, sir, my books have not been rejected? Whether this penalty 271 AAD can be levied? So, sir, in my humble submission, although it would have been a perfect case for rejection of books of accounts, but even if the books have not been rejected, in my humble submission, that will not come in the way of levy of penalty under section 271 AAD. What it requires is that there should be a false entry which has been defined by way of fake and false invoices, and once that is established, even if books have not been rejected, still penalty under 271 AAD can be levied. Now coming to the defaults which have been envisaged. So this provision is in addition to other provisions. The proceedings we have seen, default has been envisaged in the books of accounts. Now what are the defaults envisaged? So first is false entry and second is omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to evade tax liability. Now the first question I am raising here is that whether this phrase to evade tax liability, this qualifies only the second default or for the first default as well. So in my humble submission, the first clause, a false entry is succeeded by semicolon and or, which acts as a disjointing feature between the two clauses. And in my humble submission, false entry, there is no requirement of evasion of tax liability. So for example, a person who is issuing sale invoices, which are fake, he will show it in books of accounts. There would be no tax evasion. But if the invoices are fake, it can be covered under false entry. So, seeing the memorandum, the reason, the purpose, the object there, and this disjointing feature, in my humble submission, to evade tax liability only qualifies omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to evade tax liability. Now, false entry has been defined by way of the explanation here. For the purpose of this section, false entry includes use or intention to use. Now, first and foremost, the question arises, sir, use तो समझ में आता है क्योंकि default हमने अभी समझा कि books of accounts में default होना चाहिए. अब books maintained है और अगर मैंने books में entry नहीं करी तो use तो हुआ नहीं. So that is why this phrase intention to use comes into picture. Now, what is the purpose of this? Sir, in my humble submission, use, obviously, if the SSC has recorded in the books of accounts that is fake and false, obviously that is use. Intention to use, and generally this would come into picture in case of search and survey cases, where documents are found, incriminating material is found, fake and false invoices are found, which may not have been recorded in the books of accounts, but the circumstances, the evidences which are found during the course of search and survey actions, during the investigations are such that these were intended to be used. Say for example, blank bill books are found, blank checkbooks are found, invoices are found, subsequent date invoices are found, books have, so all these circumstantial evidences, if the assessing officer is able to show with the investigations there that these invoices which have been found were intended to be used, seeing even the past history of the SSC. Say for example, similar invoices have been debited by the SSC in these books on earlier occasions, and similar invoices are found which may be on a future date. then obviously the department can argue that it was intended to be used. So use or intention to use has that import. Now,
सोमेन 153A तो कवर होता ही नहीं है।
क्यों सर?
आपने कहा ना 153A में जो रिटर्न भरोगे वो
सर वो
271
सर वो 270A में था, अब तो 271 डबल एडी में है।
ठीक है, इसके अंदर वो कवर था। दूसरा, पुराने वक्त में होता था ना कि लोग परचेज और सेल दोनों लेते थे
जी
अपने टर्नओवर बढ़ाने के लिए,
जी जी
तो वो दोनों सेल परचेज दोनों एंट्री कवर होगी इसमें, तो
सर एग्रीगेट हो जाएगा,
एग्रीगेट हो जाएगा ना।
बिल्कुल सर
हाँ,
एग्रीगेट हो जाएगा सर। So sir, first and foremost, this phrase use or intention to use has been given in this perspective in my humble submission. Now what is false entry that has been defined? Sir, clause A, forged or falsified document such as false invoice or in general a false piece of documentary evidence. Second, invoice in respect of supply or receipt of goods or services or both issued by the person or any other person. तो subsection 1 पहले cover हुआ, subsection 2 यहाँ पे cover हुआ, or any other person without actual supply or receipt or goods or services or both. Third, in respect of invoice in respect of supply or receipt or goods or services or both to and from a person who does not exist. तो सर non-existent entity के साथ transaction या transaction itself which does not exist actually. There is no actual supply or receipt of goods or services. वो तो हमारे clause B और C में specifically covered हैं sir. Now they go to show that this provision of false entry comes into play only in case of invoices, जो कि clause B और C में दिया गया है sir. So this is in line with the provision as with the object which is given in the memorandum. अब ये question आता है sir clause A, which is a little more general. Forged or falsified documents such as false invoice or in general a false piece of documentary evidence. So the question arises, can we say this phrase a false piece of documentary evidence is of wider import? It goes beyond something beyond false invoices. So sir, in my humble submission, the interpretation rule of adjustum generis should be applied. This phrase, a false piece of documentary evidence, forged or falsified documents, and clause A would be interpreted in light of this words false invoice in clause A and invoices in clause B and C. So this concept adjustum generis has to be applied, and this invoices, these false piece of documentary evidence provided in clause A also will revolve around false invoice only in my humble submission. Say assessee may try to obtain market quotations to substantiate the fake and false invoice. Such quotations, such documentary evidences which is sought to be used in addition to these fake and false invoices, which are in nature of these transaction only, those are only sought to be covered as false piece of documentary evidences. तो सर
सुमेर एक मिनट, अगर आप देखो ना, वो इट इज एन इंक्लूसिव डॉक्यूमेंट, सच एज लिखा है. इट इज नॉट सेइंग दैट दिस इज इंक्लूसिव, दिस इज सच एज.
यस सर. तो सर सच एज जो लिखा है उसके बाद पहला वर्ड उन्होंने यूज किया फॉल्स इनवॉइस, और आगे यूज किया जनरल वर्ड दैट इज फॉल्स पीस ऑफ डॉक्यूमेंट्री इनवॉइस. तो माय सबमिशन इज my submission is जो second phrase है false piece of documentary evidence, this will take color from false invoice only in lines of adjustum generis.
Okay.
This will not go beyond this will not be of a wider import. This will remain, this will be linked to the false invoice only. That is my humble interpretation, sir. On lines of adjustum generis in line with the memorandum that we understood. So sir, on this basis I argue that this false entry will not cover accommodation entries, alleged accommodation entries such as gift, capital, share capital, loans. All those, in my humble submission, are not covered under this definition of false entry in my humble submission. Now, the second default is omission of any entry, which is relevant for computation of total income. Now, at the first blush, sir, reading this word, this phrase, along with the fact that it has not been defined in the provision, as false entry we saw has been defined, we get clarity from there what is being sought to be covered, but omission has not been defined. So one may argue, sir, this may be of wider import. But sir, you may kindly recall in the memorandum, the second part which they sought to cover, that is the racketeers, the people who are involved in this malpractice, who are not involved in any actual business, merely issuing invoices. And sir, in practice, in real life, they don't maintain any books of accounts. They don't make any entries. So to my mind, this omission is for those other persons, for those people who are not who are omitting such entries, which is relevant, is being sought to be covered. And in my humble submission, even the second default which has been envisaged has to be read in light of the memorandum itself, with the object purport given in the memorandum. And therefore, this omission of any entry which is relevant for computation has to be understood, in my humble submission, literal as well as schematic interpretation of the provision in light of the memorandum in relation of the fake and false invoices only. Now coming to subsection 2. Subsection 2 provides where the assessing officer of the first mentioned person can levy penalty on the other person who causes this first mentioned person to make a false entry or omit, who himself omits, or who causes the first mentioned person to omit the entry. Now the penalty on such other person will also be equal to the amount of this false entry or omitted entry. Now again, the people who are sought to be covered would be people who are involved in this racketeers, malpracticing people. And in my humble submission, be it subsection 1 for the defaults, be it subsection 2, the first and foremost, the burden to prove would lie on the assessing officer to lead material on record on the basis of facts on record, that this is a false entry or there is omission of entry which is in relation to the fake or false invoices. So the assessing officer in subsection 2 also would be required to attribute an element of deceit, an element of mental culpability on such other person. Then only he can cover such person under subsection 2. An employee who is carrying out his work in a routine, normal manner on the instructions of his employer, then unless and until any element of deceit or mental culpability is attributed to such person, to the employee, in my humble submission, penalty cannot be levied under subsection 2 on such employee. So for subsection 2 also, the assessing officer would be required to attribute the defaults envisaged with the element of mental culpability on such assessee, such other person. So in my humble submission, this provision of 271 AAD has to be interpreted in light of the memorandum. I'm cautious of the fact that when the provision, the literal interpretation of the provision is unambiguous, there is no need to fall back on the memorandum. But we cannot be oblivious of the fact that if the literal reading leads to unintended consequences and hardships, then the purport object of given in the memorandum has to come into the picture and the provision has to be interpreted in light of that object and the purpose. So the last question which I want to discuss here is, what is the position with respect to the defense of reasonable cause under section 273 capital B, whether it is available for 271 AAD or not? So sir, you may kindly recall 273B contains a whole list of provisions in respect of which the assessee is able to prove that the failure which has been given in that respective penalty provision, if it is on account of reasonable failure on the part of the assessee, reasonable cause on the part of the assessee, then no penalty can be levied as per 273 capital B. Sir, 271 AAD has not been added to that list. So the defense of reasonable cause is under section 273B is not there for 271 AAD. And to my mind, it is a deliberate omission. And this I say for the reason that the default envisaged under section 271 AAD is false entry based on fake invoices, omission of any entry based on fake and false invoices. So
the element of deceit, the element of mental culpability is, in my humble submission, engrossed, is embedded in the provisions of 271 AAD. And if the assessing officer is able to establish that yes, this false invoices, fake invoices were being used, then I don't think there would be any reasonable cause for using such fake and false invoices. And therefore, to my mind, the bar of element of deceit, the culpability to be attributed to the assessee to activate provision 271 AAD is higher. And once it is established, there is no requirement of reasonable cause failure as a defense under section for section 271 AAD penalty. So, sir, in the end, I would conclude that this provision, although the purpose of this provision, as we saw from the memorandum, cannot be disputed, but in my humble submission and with the hopes that this provision will not be subjected to abuse or misuse by the tax administration. Otherwise, the object cannot be disputed, but it is only that in practical, in application, we just hope that this provision is applied for the purpose for which it has been brought on the statute as per the memorandum. With this, I thank everyone from the core of my heart for lending me your for the patient hearing, and I thank you all for the from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Hello, सोमिल जी,
सर
ये इतनी पेनल्टीज लगा के जो एंट्री प्रोवाइडर है, मिडल मैन है, सबके ऊपर पेनल्टी लगा के ये सारा काम तो बंद हो गया।
सर वही इंटेंशन है।
इससे तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेट होगी काफी सारा।
सर दैट इज समथिंग वी शुड बी। क्यों सर, क्यों फेल हो जाएगी?
इतने सारे अनएम्प्लॉय हो गए, कैश लेके आता था, कोई कैश लेके जाता था।
तो सर और रेवेन्यूज खड़े होंगे सर एम्प्लॉयमेंट की, ऐसी क्या बात है? डिजिटल इंडिया आगे बढ़ रहा है, मेक इन इंडिया आगे बढ़ रहा है और एम्प्लॉयमेंट के जनरेशन रेवेन्यूज आएंगे सर।
एम्प्लॉयमेंट घटा रहे हैं, बढ़ा रहे हैं, समझ में नहीं आ रहा।
इस प्रोविजन से उन्होंने प्रोफेशनल, मिडल मैन, ये सब जीत लिए बीच में।
आपने ये बहुत अच्छे से समझा दिया कि भैया एंट्री बाजी के चक्कर में ना पड़ो, ना लो ना दो, जेन्युइन इनकम दिखाते रहो और ये पेनल्टी से बचो। नहीं
सर
तो
मैं यस सर प्लीज
नहीं तो
कंप्लीट।
केस सोमिल जी के पास लेके जाना पड़ेगा। चलो जी हाई कोर्ट।
सर जो मैं मतलब आई कैन शेयर हियर दैट जो हम रिजीम देख रहे हैं एक काफी पैराडाइम शिफ्ट है। जैसे हम फेसलेस असेसमेंट आया,
यस,
फेसलेस चीजें आ रही हैं। मतलब जो हम बात करते थे ना सर कि फॉरेन कंट्रीज से हम कंपेयर करते थे, सर फॉरेन कंट्रीज में वी हैव ऑल ट्रैवल्ड अलॉट। हम जो कॉन्सेप्ट देखते हैं, देयर इज अ ट्रस्ट इन द एसएससी इन देयर ओन सिटीजंस कि भाई जो वो कर रहे हैं ठीक कर रहे हैं। देयर इज अ गुड लेवल ऑफ कॉन्फिडेंस देयर। तो अब हम उस तरफ आगे जा रहे हैं कि हम कुछ भी इन्वेस्टिगेट नहीं करेंगे। इवन डिपार्टमेंट ऑल्सो सर, जैसे हम वेबिनार सुन रहे हैं कमिंग फ्रॉम दी सीबीडीटी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स ऑल्सो। अब जैसे कल हम जो आई वाज लिसनिंग टू दिस वेबिनार, उनका इंटेंट ऑफ द कॉन्सेप्ट जो अब सर वे फॉरवर्ड में देखता हूँ, फेसलेस असेसमेंट, इवन पेनल्टीज गोइंग फॉरवर्ड, सर डिपार्टमेंट के पास डेटा कलेक्शन इज कमिंग फ्रॉम एम्पल रिसोर्सेज। आपके एसएफटीज हैं, 26 एएस हैं, अमेंडेड फॉर्म्स हैं, जिसको बहुत डेटा है उनके पास, डेटा माइनिंग है, रेगुलेटरी अथॉरिटीज है, बैंक्स है, टीडीएस कटेगा। मतलब देयर आर एम्पल प्लेसेस फ्रॉम वेयर दे आर गेटिंग डेटा। तो उन्होंने जो कॉन्सेप्ट इंट्रोड्यूस किया है सर, वो है डेटा माइनिंग, डेटा मैचिंग, और जहां आपकी रिटर्न will not be commensurate with your activities, that would be the area of red flags जिसमें कि investigations और examination होगी। वो जो conventional concept था ना सर कि questionnaire आएगा 45 point का और फिर आपका roving inquiries होगी, examination होगा, that is something in times to come will be over। और इन red flags, इन matching concept के basis पे जो उनको एक जो ऐसा था, you will recall हमारे honorable PM ने भी सर यही कहा कि साहब फॉरेन ट्रैवल तो हो रहा है, लग्जरी गाड़ियां तो काफी आ रही हैं, पर रिटर्न्स तो उतनी है नहीं। तो द होल कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ मैचिंग द रिटर्न कमेंसुरेट विद योर एक्टिविटीज हो गया। एक्टिविटीज हर जगह नेट में है उनके। देयर इज एम्पल लेंस ऑफ द रेगुलेटरी अथॉरिटीज कवरिंग द एक्टिविटीज ऑफ द एसएससी। उसके बेसिस पे अब वो असेसमेंट्स करेंगे। असेसमेंट्स भी आपके इशू बेस्ड होंगे, स्पेसिफिक होंगे। क्वेश्चन आया, आपको सबमिट करना है, इफ इट इज फाइन, इट इज ओवर।
उसमें बात ये रह गई कि पहले डिपार्टमेंट हमसे पूछता था
जी,
तो बताएगा कि तुमने किया क्या है, हमें पता है, तुम लो।
जी, तो
they will not ask you
हाँ जी,
done this please, ये आप ये तुम्हारे पे सेक्शन अप्लाई करते हैं बात।
तो सर वो जो ऑनरिंग दी ऑनेस्ट वाला फंडा है, आपके ऊपर जो ट्रस्ट बनाना दिखाना चाह रहे हैं वो, दैट इज व्हाट दे आर ट्राइंग टू कन्वे कि साहब हम आप पे ट्रस्ट करते हैं, प्लस आपकी एक्टिविटीज मॉनिटर हो रही हैं, अगर हमें कहीं कमियां लगेंगी देन विल पॉइंट इट आउट।
That is our PM style of saying, I trust everybody, but he has not left anybody to be distrusted. सारी